This is On Shifting Ground. I'm Ray Suarez. Kim Jong-un's threat of retaliation hasn't been idle. High activity has been spotted at a North Korean nuclear complex. The government in Pyongyang is reportedly close to completing a new nuclear reactor. Tensions on the Korean Peninsula are heating up once again. As South Korea endures the constant threat of attack, and as the political stakes heighten, President Yoon Suk-yeol must govern. In the last couple of weeks, he told the reunification ministry that South Korea should stop throwing money at the North. It seems clear both sides of the 38th parallel are firmly entrenched, and a solution to nuclear escalation may be impossible. Joining me to explain what it's like living with a next-door neighbor who's often threatening war is Jeongmin Kim, lead correspondent at NK News and editorial director at Korea Pro, based in Seoul. Welcome to On Shifting Ground.
Thank you.
In your reporting, you describe President Yoon welcoming U.S. engagement in joint drills with South Korea. Why has the South Korean government been so keen to revive the exercises that were suspended during the Trump administration?
Well, one is the domestic political side for President Yoon trying to reaffirm his conservative base here ahead of the 2024 parliamentary election that's coming up. And another part is the international and also regarding deterrence against evolving threats from North Korea. President Yoon came into his post with a very low popularity. And for conservative South Koreans, it's very important to reassure that their relationship with the U.S. is quote-unquote ironclad. For them, the United States is the most important diplomatic partner, especially 70 years after what conservatives and progressives as well. And in the evolving security situation globally right now, domestically, he is different from the previous administration in that they will stick closer to the U.S. and also to Japan for trilateral cooperation, and that South Korea is not prioritizing the engagement with North Korea, hence why he's saying that we shouldn't throw money at North Korea. And the second part is deterrence and North Korea's evolving threat. After September last year, North Korea announced a new law saying that North Korea is completely a nuclear state now, and they have written down all the conditions of use for their own nuclear weapons. And it increased the bar of using it against non-nuclear states as well, if they're allied with the U.S., which includes South Korea. And the recent military weapon system, the shorter range ones that can allegedly carry the nuclear warheads, are directly targeted at South Korea. So South Korea, without nuclear weapons and lacking conventional capacity as well, South Korea has to tread closer to the U.S.
There are, after all, 51 million South Koreans. When things go from thaw to freeze, from quiet to missile launches and threats and heightened military alerts, what do rank-and-file South Koreans do? Can you tell from daily life in the country that things are getting tense?
Very ironically, no. For daily life in South Korea, regardless of the generation, it is already a very difficult place to live in. The employment rate is still bad and the economy is still difficult. South Korea is also a very vibrant democracy. So because it's a vibrant democracy, we don't always care about North Korea. But why does Yoon Suk-yeol talk about this? It's because for his main supporter groups, people in their 60s or 70s, people in Daegu, the conservative province, and the younger men, they do care.
Well, the two countries have undoubtedly grown apart in the 7 decades. Different systems, different standards of living, different worldview. I know there are still many families separated since the war in the 1950s, but it is getting to be a long time now. Does the separation feel more permanent? And because it's been going on so long, is it less intensely felt as the wartime generations age and die off?
We do not think about this division anymore that much because we see North Korea as just a neighborhood country. But I always thought that for the families themselves, it would still feel close. But because they are losing hope so much for 7 decades, and they're getting old. I think they're losing hope too. So when I talk to them, most of them don't even answer emotionally. I think when I ask them, what is the top one thing that you would like to do with the separated family in the North? How can the government help you? I always thought they would say they want to meet them. But what they would say that I'm too old, I can't go anywhere. I just want to know if they're alive. It's their biggest ambition right now, which is sad and ironic.
July will mark the 70th anniversary of the armistice agreement that stopped the fighting but didn't really stop the war, officially. Do Koreans in the South even want reunification anymore, 7 decades after the war ended? It was hugely expensive for West Germany, and East Germany wasn't even nearly as poor as North Korea is, and wasn't separated for as long. Do Southerners really think, yes, we want to be one country?
It really depends on who you ask and how you ask, because in South Korea, as you grew up, because you read all the same textbook, it's also sort of engraved in our morality, sense of norm to say unification is good, because they're our own compatriots, they're our own people. We learn that, but it does not really get reflected in how we actually see things. So some of the stats show that young South Koreans see North Koreans just as the way they see immigrants, for example. Some other polls show that increasingly more students are saying that unification is either not needed or we shouldn't do it. And for the reasons, top reasons for people to say we shouldn't do it, it's because of economic issues. There is already a very big economic growth and development gap between the two countries. And South Korea is already a very polarized country where vulnerable population are having a lot of difficulties, including defectors. So if we do a mass unification without enough preparation, as it is with many of the countries in the history that went through unification, South Koreans know that the society will go through crisis one way or another. And a lot of Southerners do not think that it's desirable. Another part is the difficulty regarding the government system. I think administration after administration, we try to figure out what kind of system will be suitable the most to ensure that the Korean Peninsula in general is stable after some sort of unification. It's very difficult to say that we want unification with North Korea unless they give up on their regime style. But it probably wouldn't be possible.
Do Koreans in the South worry about the North? The North is not a neutral presence on the peninsula. It's aggressive. It's kind of a gangster regime. It runs on stolen capital. They're not really a benign presence up there that you can just forget about. Do Koreans actively worry about what they're up to up there?
We do, but it's not something that we worry about every day when I wake up, like just now for me. But I think it's something that reminds us because of certain events. One part of that emotion, I think, is fear, like you mentioned, and it comes from active battles. So when we go through this type of incidents where we actively feel the North Korean threat, physical threat on South Korean lives, we both hate and fear them. But another part of it is something very difficult to report, actually, but I'm glad you asked, is South Koreans are making North Korea into a meme. The fear and hatred, it gets condensed into these memes. For example, North Korean leader killed his uncle, executed his uncle during the power struggle. And North Korean leader also killed his half-brother.
Had him murdered with poison, right?
Yes. And these deaths are gruesome, but South Koreans, ironically, they meme these instances into who Kim Jong-un is, what North Korea is. It's this country that's uncivilized, that just kills their uncle with a gun, kills their half-brother with poison, very not modern. But because South Korea sometimes referred to North Korea as a butt of joke, people forget the seriousness of these issues.
Has the unpredictability of your next-door neighbor done something that history didn't do? Made you closer to Japan? I was just reading recently that it was 20 years after the end of World War II until South Korea had regular diplomatic relations with Japan, which kind of remarkable. But now these tense neighbors with some acknowledged bad history, uh, you kind of need each other. Is that fair?
Well, I think from the government point of view and military point of view, definitely. Japan is a very important ally to the US. South Korea will never actively recognize the Japanese self-defense forces as quote unquote military, but in terms of trilateral cooperation, they will. They will see it as a military partner in the region because, just putting it plainly, it's difficult to monitor North Korean missiles that are flying just from South Korean assets. We need Japanese assets. We need US assets. We have to get together, match those assets together, what they tracked and detected, and figure out what kind of weapons North Korea possesses. So the need for a joint military effort with Japan is increasingly needed, and we all knew that. But South Korea-Japan relation was a can of worm that was always there. It's very difficult for any administration to resolve.
From time to time during this program, I urge our listeners to pull out a map because sometimes I want them to see something very important, and today's program is no exception. It's the South Korean capital, Seoul. It's right near the border with North Korea. Does that make it feel different from other cities in the South? Closer to the potential front line, more in danger if war were to suddenly break out?
It does. That's why our company last year, we gathered a diplomatic crowd and also companies to do a crisis management seminar because we realized how close it is to the front line and how dangerous it is actually, because when the tension's ramping up, there are always possibility for not even intentional attacks, but accidental clashes. And when those happens, like for example, when a missile backfires and a North Korean missile accidentally crosses the border and into the coast of Sokcho, we have to know what we have to do when something like an active battle breaks out. But what I realized after the crisis management event, where I was a host, I as a South Korean, I don't know that much about where the bunkers are, what I should get, where I should go. So I think although in the back of our head, when we go to the observatory watching North Korea with the binoculars, we do feel it sometimes that it is a very dangerous capital. I don't think we prepare ourselves enough for that, which means that I don't think that the feeling of fear is that much close to our heart, maybe partly because we got so used to it, which is not a good thing for security.
You know, throughout our conversation, we've talked about the North and what it does, and Japan and the United States. And I wonder if Koreans feel sometimes like they're really on their own, even though there's so much interest in what goes on the peninsula. Recently, the Reunification Ministry and the United Nations have filed reports that show gross human rights violations, disappearances, torture, executions, that this kind of thing goes on. The countries that might be able to bring pressure against North Korea, like Russia and China, don't seem to be ready to do it. That the 51 million of you feel like, well, we're kind of on our own sometimes, that nobody can control those people up there, so we have to make sure we're ready for whatever happens.
Yes and no. The no part is because South Koreans don't want to feel like they're on their own, they try to tread closer to the US so that we get the US extended deterrence. But what is extended deterrence? It's very difficult for ordinary South Koreans to grasp what it means because of the sense of uncertainty and the lack of having our own fate to our hands. There is an increasing talk of South Korean nuclear armament in South Korea. The topic was always there. It was like a hovering elephant in the room all the time. But I think as long as I monitored South Korea, this topic has never been this mainstream. It was always considered a fringe idea. But after Ukraine war, something changed. I think South Koreans increasingly see nuclear weapons as not something like an axis of evil North Korea holds, but something like an ultimate power. Not everybody understands the risk of proliferation and what kind of geopolitical complications that nuclear weapons will bring. Some people just see it as power and the power to defend ourselves, even when the US shuns us. When they are not willing to give up San Francisco for Seoul, when China and Russia is not being helpful with having North Korea on the leash, if we have nuclear weapons, it will be better.
And just to be clear, you mean a South Korean bomb, not American nuclear assets stationed with American personnel on the Korean Peninsula.
There are polls that ask both of them. And interestingly, the answers are positive for both of them. But I think it comes from different reasons. Redeployment of US tactical nuclear weapons. When South Koreans are asked, if you have to choose between the US forces in Korea and the redeployment of tactical nuclear weapons, what will you do? And people usually go for the US forces Korea. But I think South Korean nuclear bomb, which is what our president recently floated and became controversial, developing our own nuclear weapons. I think it not only reflects, there is a high support for that, first of all, but I think a big part of it comes from national pride. And you can see that we can do it if we want. We could do it if you want, but we're just not doing it because we're the good kid in the classroom. So it's a complicated issue here, and it's definitely one of the increasingly prominent topic in South Korea.
Jeongmin Kim, thanks for joining us on Shifting Ground. It was great to have you.
Thank you.
Jeongmin Kim is the lead correspondent at NK News and the editorial director at Korea Pro. She's based in Seoul. You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Elise Manukian, Matteo Schimpf, and Andrew Stelzer. It was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Our associate producer is Sienna Barnes. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Sport is our executive producer. Philip Yoon is CEO of World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for listening.